Welcome to Breakdown, Episode 6. In any hospital, long after the sun goes down, there's this hidden rhythm that takes over. It's a story that isn't told in hours and minutes, but by the pull of two very different biological clocks. You've got the patient's clock, which is just struggling to find its footing in the sea of fluorescent light. And then you have the caregiver's clock, fighting every natural impulse just to stay awake. This is the story of that invisible battle, and what happens when those two clocks collide. So, let's just get right into it. What happens? Because this isn't just some theoretical question, right? For patients in critical care, and for the first responders watching over them, this is a nightly reality. The very place that's designed to help us heal can accidentally wage war on one of our most fundamental biological systems. And that has serious consequences for both the person in the bed and the person standing right next to it.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to get into the science of our powerful internal clock, what makes us tick. Then we'll look at what happens when that clock gets shattered from the patient's point of view. After that, we'll flip the script and look at the caregiver's inverted clock. We'll see exactly where those two worlds dangerously intersect. And finally, we're going to zoom out and ask a much bigger question about how we even think about time in medicine.
All right, let's start with the basics. Because to really get what goes wrong in a hospital at night, we first have to appreciate this beautiful, intricate system that's working inside every single one of us all the time. So, you've probably heard the term circadian rhythm, but what is it really? Well, think of it like your body's internal operating system. It's this natural process that syncs everything you do to the 24-hour day. And it's not just about sleep. This thing dictates your body temperature, hormone release, even how your heart functions. And it's all synchronized by the most powerful signal in our environment, light. Now, what's really cool is how this whole system is organized. Deep inside your brain, in this tiny little spot called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN for short, sits the master clock. It's like the conductor of an orchestra. But here's the thing. Every single one of your organs, your liver, your heart, you name it, has its own little peripheral clock, and the SCN's job is to send out signals to keep all those musicians playing in perfect time together. So how does it actually keep time? Well, it all comes down to this amazingly elegant little feedback loop happening in our genes. Think of it like a four-step dance. Step 1, a couple of starter genes flip a switch, turning on a bunch of other genes. Step 2, those genes make proteins that start to build up inside the cell. Step 3, once you get enough of those proteins, they actually go back and turn off the original starter switch. And then, as they fade away, the switch flips back on, and the whole dance starts all over again. It takes about 24 hours to complete. It's like a self-winding watch that's built right into our DNA. It's incredible. Okay, so now that we get the system, let's see what happens when you take that finely tuned clock and drop it smack into the middle of the controlled chaos of an intensive care unit. This is where the patient's story really begins. For a patient in the ICU, their entire world is just flipped upside down. All the normal cues that our master clock relies on, light and darkness, they're just gone. Instead, you've got this constant, humming fluorescent light, the endless beeping of machines, and people coming in to check on you at all hours. This environment basically erases the line between day and night, and it just throws that master clock into a state of total confusion. Doctors and nurses actually have a name for what happens because of this circadian disruption. It's called sundowning, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Even in a room with no windows, as the time of day when the sun should be setting arrives, the body knows something is wrong. This internal battle can bubble up as the state of really intense late-day agitation and deep confusion. Let's break down exactly what's happening here, biologically. First, that SCN pathway gets all messed up. That means the body's production of melatonin, that's the sleep hormone, it gets suppressed. That directly leads to the patient feeling agitated and unable to get any real sleep. And to make it all worse, when you're in that confused state, even simple things like shadows in the corner of the room can be misinterpreted, making the confusion and the distress so much worse. Okay, so let's pivot now. While the patient's clock is being scrambled, there's another person in that room whose clock is being deliberately and forcibly turned upside down, the first responder on the night shift. This quote from a night shift nurse, Roberta Snyder, it says it all. There's this point, deep in the night, what some people call the witching hour, when your body's drive to sleep is at its absolute screaming peak. For a first responder, this isn't just about feeling a little tired. It's about hitting a very real physiological wall. And here is the brutal math that explains that feeling. Studies have shown that nurses who work back-to-back 12-hour shifts, they only get about 5.5 hours of sleep in between. And that's not just a one-time thing. It's a sleep debt that just keeps building up shift after shift, night after night.
So what do we have? We've got a patient who's disoriented and agitated, and we have a caregiver who's sleep-deprived and fighting their own biology. This is the climax of our story. This is where these two worlds collide, right in the middle of the night.
What is so critical to understand is what's happening at the exact same time in this 3 a.m. danger zone. The patient is hitting their absolute peak of confusion because their clock is so disrupted. And at that very same moment, the first responder is in what scientists call the window of circadian low, the point where their brain function, their performance is at its absolute worst. So the patient is at their most vulnerable, just as their caregiver is at their most impaired.
And look, this isn't just about feeling groggy. The data shows this has real, dangerous consequences. Research looking at workplace accidents shows that as your shift gets longer, your risk goes way up. As you can see here, the risk of having an accident for someone working a 12-hour shift is literally double that of someone working an 8-hour shift. That applies to medical errors just as much as it does to anything else.
You know, this collision of clocks, it really reveals a deep vulnerability in our entire healthcare system. And it forces us to ask a much bigger question. If our internal rhythms are so important, how much does time itself really matter in medicine?
I mean, it seems logical, right? You'd think that doing a major surgery when the medical team is sharp and the patient's body is at its peak should lead to better outcomes. But when researchers have actually tried to prove that, well, the evidence has been surprisingly messy. It's complicated.
Just take a look at this. For something like aortic valve surgery, one really interesting French study found that patients who had surgery in the afternoon actually had fewer major heart problems. But then, a bigger analysis that looked at lots of studies found no difference at all between morning and afternoon. And it's the same for ICU admissions. Studies show that getting admitted at 3 a.m. versus 3 p.m. doesn't seem to change your chances of survival. The big takeaway here is that we just don't have a clear answer yet.
So what does all this mean? While the specific data on procedures might be a little murky, the fundamental science is not. What we have is a system that by its 24/7 nature puts this incredible strain on the biological rhythms of absolutely everyone involved. It's a shared vulnerability where a patient's ability to heal and a caregiver's ability to perform are both being compromised because we so often ignore our internal clock.
And that leaves us with the most important question of all. This isn't just about managing fatigue or making patients a little more comfortable. This is a design challenge. It's a policy challenge. How can we start to build a system of care that actually works with our biology instead of constantly fighting against it? How do we design hospitals that honor the powerful, hidden rhythm of the night? That is something worth thinking about.